What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today we'll be doing another live fantasy football mock draft. And as you can see, this will be a 10-team standard mock on ESPN. We are drafting out of the 7th spot. And before we get started here, a quick reminder, if you haven't already, get yourself a copy of the 2019 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide. It not only has strategies for your drafts, whether it be standard, snake, but also auction drafts included. On top of that, obviously, you've got your overall player rankings, individual player rankings on top of player bios. So, more than enough at a great value. Check out the description for everything needed to get yourself a copy now. And with that said, let's dive back into this draft as we've already seen our top two selections with Saquon Barkley and Christian McCaffrey. And I will say this, in standard drafts, I don't think that Christian McCaffrey or Alvin Kamara should be that second overall pick. I think it should be either Saquon or Zeke, simply for the fact that since we are not taking into account the receptions, obviously there will be reception yards. Sure, no problem about that. But both Zeke and Barkley, I think, are in a category by themselves when it comes to ability to get you over 1,300 or 1,400 yards. I don't quite think Christian McCaffrey or Alvin Kamara will be able to do that. So that's why I prioritize them with the first and second picks. But let's look at the big board. Let's look at who's been drafted because it is our selection here. Barkley, McCaffrey, then Zeke. Great value there. Alvin Kamara, DeAndre Hopkins with the 5th pick, Melvin Gordon with the 6th. And I'm going to have my choice here between Le'Veon Bell, Devontae Adams, Michael Thomas, Julio, David Johnson, just to name a few. What I'm going to end up doing here is I'm going to pass on Le'Veon Bell because, again, I think he's one of those PPR type backs, and I'm not so hot on the Jets offense or their offensive line. Instead, I'm going to go Devontae Adams. Actually, my number one overall wide receiver. That hasn't changed at this point in time. I don't envision it unchanging unless there's some type of major news that comes out all of a sudden. Then we see Todd Gurley. Definitely a surprise here because Todd Gurley, even though ESPN had him, I believe, as their 12th overall player, him going in the first round with that 8th choice, I would call that a reach. So far, Gurley should belong in that middle of the second round to end of the second round selection. And when I say that, I mostly have in mind 12-team leagues. So getting him in the 8th pick in the first round, I would call that a bit of a reach considering how big of a question mark he is. Ultimately, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets you top 10 overall fantasy player production. But to me, I think right now he's just such a risk that he falls out of the first round. Doesn't fall out of being draftable at all, but does fall out of the first round to a second round selection. Now, we're going to see probably one or two auto picks here. That's why this kind of draft process has slowed down a little bit. But for the most part, it looks like everyone else is here. Maybe only one or two people are missing. So, again, what we're going to see here, probably Le'Veon Bell, followed by maybe a run on wide receivers. What I'm really hoping here is if David Johnson somehow falls to us at that 14th overall pick. I don't think it'll happen. I think that's very wishful thinking, but I would be ecstatic if that were to occur. Julio Jones being selected there. So let's see what happens here with the next couple of selections. Then David Johnson, as we expected with the first pick in the second round. Le'Veon Bell was selected after Gurley, then Julio Jones, then, like we said, David Johnson, Michael Thomas. So we're going to have an interesting decision to make here. I was actually going to say maybe go with the Travis Kelce, but the next best available running back, I'm looking at a guy like a James Conner. I'm looking at a guy like a Dalvin Cook, a guy like a Joe Mixon. I actually think that Joe Mixon ranked a little bit lower than where he belongs here. ESPN has him ranked 18th overall. I'll tell you right now, the three guys that I am considering since we went wide receiver with our first selection are James Conner, Joe Mixon, and Dalvin Cook. And it's close, but I'm going to go ahead and give Joe Mixon the edge here simply because I believe that Jalen Samuels will be a little bit more so involved in that Pittsburgh offense than we have been led to believe. There's a lot of players that I really like here, but I'm going to try and kind of make a balanced roster, see what ends up happening, see the end result. So I'm going Joe Mixon here, and we'll see. Maybe we'll have one of these guys. Maybe a well, Dalvin Cook won't make it back to us. That definitely won't happen. But let's see on some of these other running backs later on. If Nick Chubb comes back to us at the end of the third round, value wise, that's a good pick. We'll see who else is available before we consider Nick Chubb, considering Kareem Hunt will be returning to that backfield. But other guys that I would have considered, I'm not the biggest Odell fan. I think in Cleveland, it's not as ideal of a situation as it was in New York for him. New system, a lot of mouths to feed. So I think that won't go as well as some people anticipate. Antonio Brown just went. He was a name that I was potentially considering, along with the Juju Smith-Schuster, who goes right afterwards. And I like that. I like to see Juju Smith go above an Odell Beckham, for example. And with Odell, you could make the argument, even though, like I said, I'm not a big fan of his situation in Cleveland, but him and Antonio Brown pretty close to each other, maybe in standard formats, closer more so because in PPR formats, I do think Antonio Brown will get targets like crazy. He might not duplicate the yardage that we've seen in his previous years in Pittsburgh, but he will get plenty of targets, making him very viable as a wide receiver one in PPR formats. But Odell Beckham, even though he might not get as many targets, I still think he has that big playability, which is why he will be a valid weapon in standard formats. I'm a little bit hesitant on him right at this point in time. Then we saw Dalvin Cook go. Good pick at the end of the second round. I love that pick by that individual. Great value. Mike Evans with the last pick in the second round. So this is kind of shaping up as we expected. We've hit the running back position. We have hit the wide receiver position. So I think we're doing all right so far because, when it gets back to us at pick 27, if we had gone back to back wide receiver, for example, man, it would have been slim pickings because I don't think a Leonard Fournette would be available. Devonta Freeman, he's a bit more of a PPR guy. Nick Chubb, definitely a prototypical standard type running back. Let's look at some of these other running backs here. Leonard Fournette just went. Like I said, I did not expect to have him available at that 27th overall pick. Derrick Henry, definitely a much more standard-based running back. Actually, purely standard-based because he brings zero to the table as a pass catcher. Devonta Freeman just went, but some of these other running backs are a little bit safer than a Derrick Henry. Aaron Jones is an interesting running back. We'll see. Maybe we can get him in the fourth round. Just kind of scrolling through here. Damian Williams also there. Sony Michel. So, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves. Let's look at guys that we're going to be taking here in the third round. And I'm not going to lie to you guys. If a Zach Ertz is available, I think at this point he might be my favorite out of all these options. If not, I'm looking at a Nick Chubb potentially. I know that situation is not going to be ideal with Kareem Hunt, and I still think Nick Chubb is a huge risk. But within the first 8 to 9 weeks, he will be a big time RB1. So I'm just going into the mindset I'm drafting Nick Chubb with the mentality to trade him before Kareem Hunt comes back and get a haul for him. If Zach Ertz is available, however, I will select him instead. He is a much safer choice. He does not bring to the table as many concerns as Nick Chubb has. But I do think if we're looking at running backs that are left, Nick Chubb probably the one that I would be targeting. I'm not a big fan of Derrick Henry at all. Marlon Mack, no thank you. Kerryon Johnson, I do think ultimately he will be the guy in Detroit, but I think it might take a little bit of time. Aaron Jones, I think we could get him later in the fourth round, so maybe if we avoid reaching on him there. Damian Williams, somewhat interestingly, ranked 44th overall. I know his yards per carry weren't the best, but I think you can make the argument that he should be above guys like a Marlon Mack, no doubt about it, considering the offense he's on. He should be above a Derrick Henry. He should for sure be above a Josh Jacobs. That's ludicrous. ESPN, without a doubt, has Damian Williams ranked way too low. So Zach Ertz made it back to us. I'm going to go ahead and get him. So right from the bat, kind of not what I expected because usually I hold off on the tight end position later on. But Zach Ertz was a good value pick at the end of the third round. And all of a sudden, we've pretty much hit all the major positions as far as getting a top notch player at that level. Devontae Adams, I have as a top three guy. Zach Ertz, another top three guy at the tight end position. Joe Mixon, sure, he will not be a top three running back. He will most likely be outside of the top five running backs, but I do think he falls between that 5 to 10 range, so I'm okay with it. He's still an RB1. I would have liked to see Nick Chubb fall to me. That's all right. We can go ahead and adjust and get another player. I mentioned an Aaron Jones to you guys. I'm looking at some of these other wide receivers potentially. I was going to go ahead and say Stephon Diggs, if he gets to us, would be tempting. Cam Newton just went. Wow, an absolute reach, the biggest reach we've seen so far with Cam Newton. I also like a Kenny Golladay. I'm not sure whether he'd be available to us that late on. Maybe Damian Williams falls as well. That'll be interesting. That would be an absolute steal. But for now, I'm just gonna go. I'm gonna try and stay true to this. I'll go with Stephon Diggs. I think he's a very good weapon as far as standard wide receivers go. And Aaron Jones, you know, I'll hold off. There's some good running backs, and I don't want to pair Devontae Adams and Aaron Jones. If the Packers have a bad week offensively, that's going to be it for me that week. So I'm going Stephon Diggs here. I think he's going to be a great wide receiver. I have him ranked above Robert Woods. I have him ranked above Cooper Kupp, above Alshon Jeffrey. Kenny Golladay is the next guy that's closest to him, but I'm going Stephon Diggs here, and I am not looking back. If I hadn't drafted Devontae Adams, probably would have gone Aaron Jones. I I won't lie to you guys. I do like the stack sometimes, but I like it at the quarterback and then either running back or wide receiver position. I don't like it at the wide receiver and running back position. I think that's a little bit too risky. You know, back these last few years when both Le'Veon and Antonio Brown were on the field, that was a viable option. I'm just not quite sure with Aaron Jones if he is on that level yet. I love him as a later, as you can see, fourth round, maybe even early fifth round. That would be crazy. That is an absolute steal for Aaron Jones, getting him that late. I love him as right now, probably people evaluating him as a RB2, but I think he can be an RB1, no doubts about it. And if you heard the recent reports about the involvement of the Green Bay Packers running backs in the passing game, that's got to have you excited again. That might be more so relevant in PPR formats, but we will see yardage at least translate to this. So again, somewhat valuable in standard formats as well. Looking at Kerryon Johnson and Aaron Jones ranked right after each other, I personally would have Aaron Jones ranked above of Kerryon Johnson. I think Jones proved everything that he needed to last year between himself and Jamal Williams. I think he is on the better offense. I think he's got the better coaching staff. I think he's got the better defense to back up that offense. So I would have Aaron Jones above Kerryon Johnson. Kenny Golladay, it'll be interesting to see if he makes it back down to us. We'll see if Damian Williams makes it back to us with the 47th overall selection. That would be an absolute highway robbery. But we'll see what happens. I think right now, with that 47th overall selection, we're probably looking at, a Sony Michel, Chris Carson, Philip Lindsay type of situation. Tyreek Hill's an interesting name. We haven't really mentioned him too far right now. That 51st overall ranking, probably, somewhat accurate. I've seen other formats where they're just not giving Tyreek Hill an updated ranking based on what we've heard with the maybe reduced suspension to only 4 games. I honestly would be shocked if his ranking stays that low, I think it's gonna rise a little bit. But again, that's only dependent on if those 4 games are the truth there. If it's higher than that, then his value will continue to drop. Initially I didn't even have him listed on my player rankings just because I anticipated that suspension to be a lot higher. But one way or another, for better or for worse, it seems like he will be available to the Chiefs for a big part of the season. And then you can put him in the category of a Julian Edelman last year, but to a much higher degree, especially in standard leagues, because Tyreek Hill is a wide receiver one. Before the news about the suspension were, kind of looming and out there, Tyreek Hill was a early second round selection, mid second round selection. So he was big time as far as the wide receivers were concerned. And let's go ahead and look at some of these available players to us. Let's look at the pick history here and kind of scroll down. And after our selection of Stephon Diggs, we saw Brennan Cooks go, Derrick Henry, Marlon Mack, Josh Jacobs, Robert Woods, Aaron Rodgers. So then Mark Ingram. Wow, I am shocked that we saw Mark Ingram go before Aaron Jones. No way should that be happening. The Ravens, way too one-dimensional of a team for that to be happening. Him going above Kerryon Johnson as well. Cooper Kupp going with that 43rd overall pick. Again, I think Cooper Kupp may be a bit more of a PPR guy, but if he returns healthy, I think he will be right around the same ranking as a Robert Woods and a Brendan Cooks when it's all said and done. And here, not really too surprised to see Brendan Cooks go above Robert Woods. I do have him ranked a little bit higher in standard formats. But guess what just happened here, folks? We have Damian Williams still available to us. I'm going to go ahead and grab him right now because to me, he is by far the best available running back. He should not be available at this point in time. In PPR formats, he is going in the end of the second round, early third round. Standard formats, he does not have this big of a drop off. That is just us taking advantage of a poor ranking on the part of ESPN. That's why, again, great example of why you guys should, really try and make your own tiers of players, your own rankings, and look at their potential projections for this year because you're going to find, depending on the platform you're drafting from, some players might be either ranked way too high or way too low. And if your fellow league mates haven't done their homework, you can get an absolute steal. And that's exactly what happened with Damian Williams here. And right now, the way this roster has shaped up, I am absolutely loving it. I'm not going to lie to you guys. Joe Mixon, Damian Williams, that's a pretty good combo considering we got Damian Williams in the 5th round. Devontae Adams, stud wide receiver number 1. Stephon Diggs, great wide receiver for the Minnesota Vikings. Zach Ertz, top 2 tight end the way that I see it. Man, Kenny Golladay just went. To me, he would have been the next selection. That would have been an absolute just home run of a pick, continuing that trend for us. But it's all right. Finally, we kind of have to think on our feet because I would say all these picks up until now have been no-brainers. I'm looking at some of these other selections. Kenyon Drake, 60th overall. I would have him lower in standard formats. Big fan of him in PPR formats, not so much in the standard formats. I'm kind of scrolling down here a little bit, looking at some of these quarterbacks. I think it's still early to be drafting one of these guys, but we'll see. We might see some of these other draftees select them depending on if they are an auto pick or not. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to select maybe a little bit of a reach, but as far as standard wide receiver production, look, Tyler Lockett, without Doug Baldwin there, I've said it before, I think it's going to take a little bit of time for Metcalf to develop in that Seattle offense, but Tyler Lockett, I think he'll get you close to 1,000 yards. He's going to have that big play ability, no doubts about that. He is right now the presumed wide receiver 1 for the Seattle Seahawks. And even though they're a run-first team, I still think he has great value. He still got you, that 1,000 yards last year with the Seahawks being that run first team. And speaking of the Seahawks and the run first team, you see Chris Carson going with the pick afterwards. I think you can make the case that Chris Carson should have been our next pick, but I'm just really worried about Rashad Penny. I think, you know, with that Seattle backfield, the history they've had, not being able to stay healthy, I think Chris Carson could be one, even short term injury away from losing his starting job to Rashad Penny. Even though I think Chris Carson is more talented, I would have to go ahead and dock him several spots compared to last year. Andrew Luck just went. I was really hoping that he'd drop to us in the 7th round. I think that would have been a good selection, but it's all right. We will go ahead and reevaluate. I see a Calvin Ridley, who I really like as a sophomore wide receiver. I think out of all the sophomore wide receivers, I probably have him ranked the highest. So if he's still there, he's going to be maybe my selection with that 67th overall pick. Then after Chris Carson, Kenyon Drake, I touched on Drake as far as PPR versus standard formats. Love him in PPR formats. He was the 14th overall running back in PPR formats last year, folks. That's crazy. I think sometimes people forget that, considering probably last year you associated Kenyon Drake with kind of a letdown performance, but now get rid of Frank Gore. I think Kenyon Drake can have a really nice season. Obviously, his room of improvement with Gore gone is probably more so in the rushing department. But again, just because of what he does in the pass catching department, that's his forte. I'm kind of staying away from him a little bit in standard formats. Then after Kenyon Drake, Andrew Luck, like I said, I was really hoping Andrew Luck would fall to us in the 7th round. Then Evan Ingram, see a little bit of a run on tight ends here. Chris Godwin, Delaney Walker. No way Delaney Walker should be going before O.J. Howard and Hunter Henry. Hell no. Delaney Walker wouldn't surprise me if he finishes outside of the top 15 tight ends. Coming off a serious injury on an offense that is very inconsistent and low scoring. Pass on Delaney Walker. No way he should be going above O.J. Howard and Hunter Henry, or even Jared Cook. I am on the clock now, however. So let's look at some of these options. Just to finish it off, after O.J. Howard, Tyler Boyd, great value for him there. Hunter Henry, David Njoku, Jared Cook. Jared Cook should be going above David Njoku, absolutely, on that Saints offense now. And what I'm going to go ahead and hope for here is that Matt Ryan is available to us with that 74th overall selection. Now, I'm going to select Calvin Ridley right here just because I think he is the next best available player. And you can see we've kind of built up some depth at the wide receiver position. So at some point, I think we should address the running back position. I might forego Matt Ryan, and that's not even going to be a possibility for me because Matt Ryan just went a couple picks after we selected Calvin Ridley. DJ Moore, Deshaun Watson, then Matt Ryan, Jarvis Landry, Tariq Cohen, Miles Sanders. Miles Sanders was someone that I was considering. I think Darrell Henderson might still be available. He might be someone that I go ahead and take a look at. Yeah, 85th overall, his ranking. But just because, again, we don't know the situation for the LA Rams, I'm treating him as a backup right now, as a handcuff. I might reach on him a little bit if I had Todd Gurley. I don't. So instead, I'm going to go to the running back position. I'm going to select Tevin Coleman for the 49ers. All reports coming out of San Fran is that he is the lead man. He's a good runner. He's a good pass catcher, all around balanced running back. So having him on the bench, I'm all right with that. I think you can plug him in and have him as a nice bye-week guy, or if someone gets injured, we'll see. If we get back to us in the 9th round and if we have a chance to take a Darrell Henderson, I might think about it as a potential stash. With Joe Mixon, what I would usually advise is selecting Giovanni Bernard. Granted, Bernard not as valuable in standard formats as he would be in PPR formats as a handcuff, but still, I would say with Joe Mixon, Bernard is a necessary handcuff. The only difference is you can get him much later. With Damian Williams, potentially a Carlos Hyde. But again, not too worried about that. Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, Zach Ertz, Tyler Lockett. Let's look at the remainder of this roster. Calvin Ridley, Coleman. So I like this so far. We've got good depth, and let's make a couple more selections. Get ourselves a quarterback, and maybe get ourselves some high-end prospects, maybe some high-end rookies. That's what you got to do when you get to these later on rounds. Let's look at the quarterback position. I am intrigued who is still left. I kind of have an idea. Baker Mayfield, Carson Wentz, Drew Brees, Dak Prescott. Right now, my highest guys would be Baker and Carson Wentz. I would more so favor Carson Wentz because I then would have that quarterback to pass catching kind of bonus. And Zach Ertz by far is the preferred option in that offense, like I mentioned, on a pass first offense. So if Carson Wentz is there for us, 87th overall, I know it'd be considered a reach, but for the sake of filling out the roster, because we're not going to stick through this entire draft here, I'm going to go ahead and likely select him. Let's look. Let's go back to our big board and look at some other players. I like a Will Fuller. Just mentioning some guys that stand out to me. If he can stay healthy, I think he is, a guy that, especially in standard formats, can be a really nice addition and surprise a lot of people. Same with Sterling Shepard. I look at a Dante Pettis. I also like him. Darrell Henderson, I mentioned. So I'll go ahead and queue up a Darrell Henderson, a very intriguing option with a high ceiling depending on what happens with Todd Gurley. Continuing to scroll down, you see a Courtland Sutton, intriguing option there. And then just now we're getting to our quarterbacks that we mentioned with Baker Mayfield. And then shortly thereafter, we will see a Carson Wentz. There you go. And Will Fuller just went as expected. Excuse me. Now, going back to this big board, I'm looking at a Darrell Henderson. Like I mentioned before, I've got him queued up. And honestly, I might go ahead and take the gamble a little bit unless we see a run on quarterbacks here. We've got a lot of people on auto pick, so it'll be very fast until we get to our next pick and we can select a quarterback there and kind of wrap this thing up. But let's see what happens with these next three selections. Right now, I would say though, considering what we have, the depth that we have, I really like this roster. I know it's a little bit early to go ahead and rank it. I still want to get that quarterback to kind of round things out. But look, Joe Mixon, where we got him in the second round, I think that was a steal. Devontae Adams in the first round, can't go wrong with that. Can't fault that selection. He is a wide receiver one, top three wide receiver. Then Stephon Diggs, actually Zach Ertz was our third round selection. Great value there. Stephon Diggs, I think, was pretty nice selection as well. And we're seeing some kickers and some defenses go. That's what's going to happen when the rest of these guys are on auto pick. So Sterling Shepard just went. D. Westbrook. Let's see what happens here. Dante Pettis, Christian Kirk, Golden Tate, Latavius Murray, and we are back on the clock. So guess what? We are going to go ahead and get our quarterback who is still there. That is Carson Wentz. So all of a sudden, we have a much more complete roster. I know there are more bench spots to be filled, but for the sake of this video, for the sake of this roster, we've got our core guys already taken care of, so we can go ahead and evaluate it. We already kind of had started doing that. I think we got great value on Zach Ertz. So our first three picks, great picks. Stephon Diggs, I would say an average pick for where he went. Damian Williams, so far, the home run pick as far as value. That should not be happening. I'd put an asterisk to that. Come draft day, that would never happen, I don't think. Then getting Tyler Lockett. Then we hit the bench spots and got some depth with Calvin Ridley, Tevin Coleman. Got a high upside guy in Darrell Henderson, and then Carson Wentz. Guys, I really like this team. If this was my squad in the actual thing when the season starts, I would be very happy. I know we could do a little bit better as far as high-end running backs, but still Joe Mixon is an RB1. Damian Williams is at a low-end RB1, so I'm all right there. And we've got some high-end prospects with Henderson and potentially with Tevin Coleman. So right now, it might be a little bit, arrogant or what, but I'm gonna give this roster a B plus, A minus. I'm really like how this happened, especially with Zach Ertz. Usually when I go tight ends early, that gamble doesn't pay off, but here I absolutely love what happened. So let me know what you guys think. Let me know how this roster turned out in your eyes. Let me hear some of your questions related to any players that you might have on your minds or anything else as far as fantasy questions go. Let me know what you guys thought of this roster. Did you like it? Did you think they were reaches? And as always, if you guys enjoyed, make sure to like, subscribe, and I will see you guys in future videos.